It's early November here in southern BC, in Tsawwassen, BC, and I posted a couple of other videos of my mason bees that I've had for, I think this is maybe 4 years or so. Anyway, this is the earliest I have harvested the cocoons. Typically I leave it later than what most recommendations say. Typically I'm waiting till past Christmas. So anyway, I think it's around now that they recommend for this area anyway to start your harvesting and cleaning the cocoons, etc. So I start off just by saying I had a bad year as far as the bees go last year. We did have a very tough winter for here, but I did keep the bees in the fridge, and I had emptied the cocoons, or emptied the tubes and cleaned the cocoons and dried them, etc. I did put them out a little earlier than what I'd hoped, but I was going away for a few weeks in early April, so I'd put them out around the end of March. The temperature was okay, but it was extremely rainy, and I think maybe that was part of my problem. I had tried a different couple of containers previous years that I've made out of cardboard to set the cocoons out in above the nests, and this past year I found some at the local dollar store that were very reasonable, so I thought I'd give them a shot, and they seem to work okay. So it's just these little made in China boxes here, and I've glued a couple together. I just ran a 5/16 bit through here so the bees would be able to climb out, and then I glued them on top of the actual nests, and I had a couple of types. I had the block type. It's missing its housing. I just pulled it out for convenience because I'm going to clean these out, so I had it mounted on top like that. And I also had some of the wooden block types, and I just had them attached to the wall above them like that, so they were close by. But the problem I had, I think I had, was two things that I may have done wrong. Is by putting them out early, and it being so rainy, a few weeks later when I returned I had a few hatched, but what I found was I had a lot of mold around these containers, and even though they were positioned under an eaves facing south, they may have got a bit of rain on them, but just maybe the moisture buildup in the wood, maybe it wasn't the best, and I found a lot of the cocoons that were sitting inside there had heavy mold on them. So needless to say, I had a very poor hatch. The previous years I'd had pretty good. I think I had about 1,500 cocoons or somewhere in that range, and not the best harvest from last year. Lost, I did a couple of counts, and I lost at least 30%. At least 30% of the cocoons did not hatch. And then I had a very poor year for results. I did find interesting, I've noticed this the past couple of years, is the block type nests, these ones here, just don't seem to do as well as these types here. Sorry for all the noise. And these types here have the cardboard tubes in with the insert. The bees just seem to prefer this style more. I'm not really sure. The one observation I had was it seemed that when they went to access these holes here, they didn't seem to get a grip on here. Whereas on here, on these ones, they could land on the end of the tube and climb in quite easily. So I don't know if that was any part of it or what, but as you can see, these ones, there's very few in there. Yet these types of the wooden type condominium thing pretty much were filled, but I only had 2 of these out. They both filled, and that was pretty much it. I had 4 of this other type put out, but as you can see, they are sparsely filled, just a couple here and there, and pretty much all of them look about the same. So not very good this year, but I'm hoping that I'll have a decent spring and we'll be able to get these multiplying up to the bigger numbers again. So one thing I did as well that I think might not have been correct was I did store them in the fridge. And previous years, you know, I was unaware of the importance of the humidity levels, although I still seem to have fairly good hatches, but I thought that I thought I may be able to increase the hatch rate if I did have more precise control on the humidity. So I did buy a little humidity gauge here, and this is what I placed inside the fridge. I just got it from the local, I think it was from Lee Valley. Can't remember how much it was, but anyway, I put that in so that gives you the temperature and the humidity reading. And I did sort of make up some of my own containers instead of buying something. There's lots of different things out there where companies will sell plastic containers that are, you know, have some holes punched in them, and then they're segregated, and you put water in one half and put the bee cocoons in the other. So I sort of made up my own little thing here, banged some holes through the top, and found some plastic containers. Just cheap things for like $1.50. So punched some holes in there, filled the containers with water, and then put them inside the bigger box, and then put the cocoons in and around them on paper towels. Now I put the humidity gauge right inside to try to see what was actually happening in there, and you know, I still didn't get the humidity up to where I've seen a bunch of recommendations for the bees. And I guess the risk is that in almost all the refrigerators, because they do you know, have a dehydration cycle, what happens if you don't have the humidity up, then it can actually suck the moisture right out of the bees within the cocoon, and they die. And I think maybe that was part of my problem. So anyway, I tried to rectify that, but again, the humidity rates weren't up to where they were supposed to be. I thought I'd read something in the higher 60s range, and I never quite got up there. So anyway, I've got a different fridge downstairs because we did a reno, so I'm going to check that one out. And what I'm trying to do is keeping my cocoons, as I'm sitting right now, in an unheated garage. So we'll keep them in here. If temperatures warm up considerably in January or something before we have any flowers out, then I will put them in the fridge. But I'm not going to put them in all year. I'm going to try to hold them off and see if maybe that helps in the success rate of the cocoons. Anyway, I had just started the other day and cleaned out a couple of these. So as you can see, there's I used to just do the cardboard tubes inside the wooden blocks that I showed earlier, and obviously, you know, these ones are very hard to open up, and I'd spent countless hours and days soaking these in water and then using a razor blade and trying to cut down and open them up, but yeah, it was very frustrating. So I found some of these tube liners, and I believe I got this from a company sort of local right here on Vancouver Island, and they work out to be about 1/4 of the price of these cardboard type tubes that you would have to renew every year. So last year I did try a bunch of them, so we just insert them in, and then when the season's over, you just pull them out. You can save these. Well, it's what I did last year. And then these tear open fairly easily, as you can see here. Just with your fingers. You don't need any tools, or you don't need to soak them really. So what I did with these tubes last year was to try to keep using them. So I would just tap them out, and realize that, you know, you can still have a lot of the pollen mites in there because they're quite small. As you can see, this pile here, this is from a few tubes I'd cleaned out, and this is, you know, probably tens of thousands of pollen mites sitting here in one of their stages waiting to start the new year off. So I put these in the oven. So I put them on a baking tray and put them in. I think I did it at 200, something like that, 225 maybe. I wanted to get it hot enough where I knew I'd probably kill off any living things, but not hot enough that I would certainly catch these on fire or maybe loosen the, I don't know if they're put together with an adhesive or what. Anyway, did that, and that seemed to work out okay, so I was able to use a lot of these tubes over again, and I'll continue to do that this year unless I learn something different. So I also tried doing some of these liner tubes out of parchment paper, so that seemed to work out fairly well, and I would just cut the parchment paper, you know, a couple of inches wide, strips about 4 or 6 inches long, depending on what size of tube I was going to fill. And I had a 1/4 inch drill bit, and I would lay the drill bit down and then twist the paper around it, insert it into the tube, and then it would be this type of tube, insert it into this type of tube, and then pull the drill bit out, and the paper one would unravel inside there, stay in a tube shape, and that went fairly quickly. So that worked out well too, but I think I'd bought 500 of these, so I'm sort of using them up, and we'll definitely go back to that using the parchment paper method, because it worked fairly well, and that's certainly much cheaper than anything you can do by buying a certain product or anything pre-made. And that was, in my opinion, worth the time and effort. So anyway, back to this. I've done like I think about 4, 5, maybe 5 tubes, and you can see the results are sort of pathetic. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Yeah, that's just mud. About only 15 cocoons, and 1 or 2 had a bit of a crunch in there. I think this one. So I don't think that's any good, but I'll check them out later when I wash them all up. So that's only averaging a couple of cocoons per tube. And this is all the tubes that I have, besides the solid blocks there, which may only have about 30 or 40 filled up. So I'll just carry on and just show you one of these as I open it up. So I find that some of them, you know, with the moisture and stuff, they don't come out super easy, but I mean this one does. So I just have a pair of pliers, and what you can do to ease them out is just use the pliers and pull it out. Now, for those who aren't familiar with them, the bees typically do an open chamber as their last one. So they're laying female eggs in the back, male eggs in the front, and the last egg they lay, they'll seal it off, and it could be back here. And then they just leave an open space and then plug it. And I guess that's part of the defensive mechanism to stop predators getting in and stuff like that. So it doesn't really matter. You know, you can, I mean, if you can get it out without breaking that, that's fine too. But if you have to, you know, I just push the pliers in to the mud there and grab, and there's probably not gonna be one in the front, so you're not really gonna damage anything. And then when I get these tubes, you can see they're put together like the others in a sort of a spiral, and you just start by grabbing the corner with a bit of your fingernail there and picking it out and pulling it down. There's the first bit of mud plug, and keep going. As you can see, that chamber that's the empty chamber, but I've got, you know, it's hit and miss. I mean, you're doing great if you've got something in each chamber, but a lot of times you don't. So that the second one there had nothing in it either, but I do have a cocoon on the first one, or the second one, and that's just a bunch of the poop from the little bee larva that was in there, around there. And then there's another plug, and this one seems to be infested. You can see the pollen mites in there. So they have probably consumed, you know, everything. Whether they ate all the pollen and starved out the bee, that's probably what happened. So the bee probably didn't have any chance to even mature at all past a grub, or the early stage. And so I've got another looks like a viable cocoon in here. So that's only two, and there's got a whole bunch more different colored. I haven't seen ones as bright orange as this here, but it looks like another type of pollen mite. You can see them, if you look very closely, you can see them sort of moving around. Yeah, quite surprising when I first got into this how many there are, and I've looked at them like under almost a microscope, and they're quite amazing little things. I mean, it's terrible because they certainly can decimate our bee populations, but quite amazing in themselves. Anyway, so we'll see what happens. After I empty out all these, what I'm gonna do is put these in a bucket of water and rinse them, swirl them around for a while, a few minutes, and that washes off a lot of the debris. And then I have a metal strainer. I put them in the strainer and I sort of shake them, and it rubs off most of the parts that are still clinging onto the outside of the cocoon. And then after that, I'll put them in a 5% bleach solution, rinse them in that, and that'll hopefully kill off any other living organisms on the surface. And then I'll dry them out in a bit of paper towel, make sure they're good and dry. And then I'll store them in the plastic container I showed you earlier, and again, keep them in this unheated area. Hopefully, if it stays cool all the way through February, then they won't have to get moved into the fridge. And as long as we have flowers out in February, then I'll put them